They say success has many fathers, but in my case, it had one who never believed his daughter could have any part in it. My name is Clara Doyle, and I grew up in the shadow of steel beams and skyscrapers, literally. My father, Richard Doyle, owned Doyle and Sons Construction, one of the biggest names in the city. The irony? There were no sons, just me. For as long as I can remember, Dad treated me like a guest in his empire. When I was 10, I'd sit in his office, legs swinging off the leather chair, watching him draw building plans on napkins. He'd smile, until he remembered I wasn't the son he wanted. By 18, I was desperate to prove myself. I studied architecture, project management, and business. Every night I buried myself in blueprints, imagining the day I'd walk through those same office doors, not as a daughter, but as a leader. That day never came. At 24, when I nervously handed him my proposal for a sustainable housing division, small scale, eco-friendly, high profit margins, he didn't even glance at it. He just laughed. "Clara, you're a bright girl, but this isn't some charity project. Real business takes brains, not emotion. You don't have the instinct." I remember the sting in my throat. The paper trembled in my hand, but he didn't notice. Or didn't care. "Maybe," I managed to say, "you should let me try. You might be surprised." He gave me that condescending smirk. "Sweetheart, I built this company from nothing. You'd destroy it in a week." That night, I sat in my car outside Doyle HQ, watching the lights flicker in his office window. His silhouette moved like a king surveying his castle. And I realized I'd never be invited inside as an heir. If I wanted a kingdom, I'd have to build my own. 2 months later, I left the company. No dramatic exit, no slammed doors. I simply walked away. Armed with my savings, my degree, and a notebook full of ideas he'd never let me pitch. It was terrifying. I rented a 300-square-foot workspace above a hardware store. My desk was an old door laid across 2 paint buckets. My team was one overworked laptop and a friend from college, Jenna, who believed in me more than my own family did. "Clara," she'd say, typing with a coffee between her knees, "if your dad could see what you're doing, he'd choke on his cigar." "Good," I'd reply, "let's make him choke harder." We called the company Arcline Developments, a name that sounded small, quiet, and forgettable. Perfect. I wanted to grow in the shadows, where my father wouldn't think to look. The first few months were brutal. Clients didn't trust a young woman running a construction startup. I spent most days cold calling, begging for contracts, only to be told, "We already work with Doyle and Sons." At night, I'd sit on the dusty floor of that office, wondering if Dad was right. Maybe I wasn't smart enough. Maybe I'd thrown away my future just to prove a point. But then, in month 6, it happened. A mid-sized property investor named Marvin Ellis needed a last-minute contractor after Doyle and Sons pulled out of a deal. They'd overbooked. I saw my chance. I drove to Marvin's office myself, wearing a blazer 2 sizes too big and shoes that pinched. I pitched like my life depended on it, because it did. "Give me one project," I said, "just one. I'll deliver under budget and ahead of schedule. If I fail, you'll never hear my name again." He studied me for a long moment, then smiled. "You remind me of myself 20 years ago. Fine, kid, you've got a deal." I didn't sleep for 2 weeks. We finished that renovation 5 days early. Marvin was impressed, and he told people. Word spread fast. Within 3 months, I had 3 more contracts, then 5, then 10. By year 2, Arcline was no longer a secret. And that's when Dad noticed. He called me one afternoon. I hadn't heard his voice in months. "So," he began in that casual tone that always masked a test, "I see you've been busy." "I have," I said carefully. "Running a construction company?" he chuckled. "Cute." "It's doing well," I replied. "We just landed a government tender." Silence. Then a sharp laugh. You think that makes you competition? Clara, I've been in this business 40 years. You're playing with toy trucks. Something inside me hardened. Maybe, but at least I'm building something that's mine. He scoffed. Yours. You're living off my contacts, my reputation. You'd be nowhere without my name. Then why are you calling me, Dad? The silence stretched long enough for me to smile. I knew then I'd gotten under his skin. That call was the beginning of a Cold War. Every time Arcline did for a project, Doyle & Sons would appear like a shadow bidder, undercutting my price by a fraction. Every time I signed a subcontractor, he'd offer them double to back out. It was ruthless, petty, and it only made me stronger. Because the harder he pushed, the smarter I got. By year 3, I'd diversified. Sustainable architecture, smart housing, renewable infrastructure. The same charity project he'd mocked had become my brand's identity. Investors loved it. Cities wanted it. And Dad's empire was starting to crack. He didn't know it yet, but Doyle & Sons was overextended. He'd borrowed heavily to maintain control of projects he was losing to me. The day I found out, I didn't celebrate. I just sat in my office, staring at the financial reports. Debt, liens, pending foreclosures. It was only a matter of time. Then came the rumor. The bank was preparing to repossess Doyle & Sons' assets. I called Marvin. Can you confirm something for me? He did, and the next day I was sitting across from a quiet banker with a file labeled Doyle Holdings Collateral Auction. When he flipped it open, my breath caught. Among the assets listed, 51% of company shares. My father's pride and power, reduced to a bank line item. How much? I asked. He hesitated. That's confidential until... I slid a check across the table. My savings, my bonuses, everything I'd earned in 4 years of grinding. I'll pay cash, I said, today. His eyebrows rose. You realize this gives you controlling ownership of Doyle & Sons. I know exactly what it gives me, and I know exactly what to do with it. A week later, I walked into the glass tower I'd once called home. The receptionist's eyes widened. Miss Doyle? Yes, I said, adjusting my blazer. Tell my father the new owner would like a word. When I entered the boardroom, he was standing at the head of the table, still wearing the same arrogance he'd worn all my life. He turned, confusion flickering in his eyes. Clara, what are you doing here? I placed the document folder on the table. Ending a family business. He frowned, then opened the file. His face drained of color. You bought my shares? No, Dad. I bought your company. The room went silent. The executives, the lawyers, even the assistants froze. You taught me how to build. You just never asked what I was building. His lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time, my father, the man who'd never believed in me, looked small. And I didn't feel anger. I felt peace.
When I left my father's boardroom that day, I didn't feel victorious. Not really. I stood in the lobby of Doyle & Sons, the company that had once defined my childhood, and it felt empty. The walls were the same, the logo still gleamed in chrome, but the air carried something new. My name, whispered in disbelief. Every step I took echoed through marble floors that had once rejected me. Now, they were mine. I'd spent 4 years building Arcline in the shadows, and for the first time, I could finally breathe in the open. Yet I wasn't here for revenge, not fully. I was here to clean up the mess my father left behind and to make sure no one ever told me I wasn't smart enough again. But first, I had to face the storm I'd just created. By the next morning, the city knew. Founder's daughter buys family company in stunning bank deal. Clara Doyle takes control of Doyle & Sons. Rival firm owner revealed as founder's daughter. The headlines hit every business outlet like a thunderclap. Investors called, journalists begged for statements. Old employees from my father's era sent me cautious, polite emails that all said the same thing. Congratulations, Miss Doyle. We never saw it coming. Neither did my father. He hadn't spoken to me since the takeover meeting, but word traveled fast. He'd cleared out his office, refused interviews, and told anyone who asked that he wasn't concerned. That was a lie. He was furious and humiliated. I walked into the old CEO office for the first time 3 days later. The space still smelled like his cologne. Heavy, musky, expensive. The shelves were lined with photos of him shaking hands with governors, cutting ribbons, standing in front of towers he'd built. At the center of the desk sat a brass nameplate, Richard Doyle, founder and CEO. I ran my hand across it slowly, then set it aside. In its place, I put a new one. Simple, black, understated. Clara Doyle, Chief Executive Officer. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I wasn't just inheriting a company, I was rewriting its story. The first board meeting under my leadership was chaos. Half the executives were loyal to my father, the other half were terrified of losing their jobs. One of them, a senior project director named Calder, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. With all due respect, Miss Doyle, you've got a good head for ideas, but Doyle & Sons isn't Arcline. You're stepping into a battlefield of debt, delayed projects, and lawsuits. I nodded. I know. That's why I'm here. He gave a smirk that reminded me too much of my father. I just hope this isn't some emotional decision, formally pride and all that. That got a few quiet chuckles around the table. I leaned forward, voice steady. If it were emotional, Mr. Calder, I'd have let this company collapse. But instead, I paid $14.2 million to save it. So unless you're offering to reimburse me, I'd suggest we start fixing the mess. Silence. Then slowly, one of the younger analysts started clapping. A few others followed. Even Calder looked away, his smirk gone. That moment was the first crack of respect I earned in that room. Fixing the company was another story. Doyle & Sons had been bleeding cash for years, over-budget projects, unpaid loans, and lawsuits from cut corners. My father had built fast and cheap. I wanted to build better. I called in my Arcline team, Jenna, our engineers, our sustainability consultants. For the first week, we barely slept. We went through every contract, every invoice, every building blueprint. Jenna dropped a stack of papers on my desk at 2 a.m. one night. Half these projects have safety violations. Your dad's team was cutting rebar thickness to save costs. I rubbed my forehead. How bad is it? Bad enough that if one of those towers collapses, your father won't be the only one ruined. We worked around the clock, quietly halting projects, renegotiating contracts, replacing suppliers. It was like repairing a plane mid-flight. The media called it the Doyle Reformation. I called it survival. About a month later, I finally saw him again. I was walking out of a city meeting when he appeared, waiting by my car, wearing the same suit he always wore to board meetings, but somehow smaller. "Clara," he said, "we need to talk." I stopped, crossing my arms. About what? The company you nearly destroyed, or the daughter you told would never make it? He flinched. "You've made your point." "No," I said softly. "You made it for me years ago." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think you're saving my legacy? You're burying it. That business was my life." "And now it's my responsibility," I replied. "The difference is I don't confuse one for the other." He sighed, his eyes glassy, but still defiant. "I built that empire with my bare hands. You think buying it makes it yours? It doesn't. You'll never understand what it takes to—" "To what?" I interrupted. "To sacrifice everyone who believes in you just to feed your ego? I learned that lesson early, Dad." He opened his mouth to respond but stopped. The fight drained out of him. For the first time, he looked tired, human. He just said, quietly, "You're still my daughter." "And you're still the man who didn't believe in me," I said, unlocking my car. I drove away before he could answer. In the months that followed, Doyle & Sons transformed. We merged it fully with Arcline, creating Doyle Arcline Group, a hybrid construction and sustainability firm. For the first time, we were building projects that made sense. Affordable housing, energy-efficient offices, community spaces. The numbers spoke for themselves. Profits tripled in 6 months. Our new headquarters was featured in business magazines as a model for modern infrastructure. Investors were lining up, and yet success felt hollow because the one person who defined my entire journey, the man I'd been fighting against, was fading quietly into the background. One night after a late strategy meeting, I got a call from an unknown number. It was my father's lawyer. He said, "Miss Doyle, your father's asked to see you. He's not well. You might want to come soon." I hesitated. The instinct to say no was strong. But somewhere deep down, that little girl, the one who used to sit in his office drawing blueprints, still existed. So I went. He was at home, surrounded by old photos and unopened mail. His hair had gone completely gray. "Clara," he whispered when he saw me, "you came." I sat beside him. "I didn't come for forgiveness. I came for closure." He gave a small nod. "Then let me give you something back." He pointed weakly to a folder on the table. Inside were old letters, some signed deals, some notes, but one caught my eye, a sketch of a building. It was mine, my original sustainable housing design, the one he'd mocked years ago. He smiled faintly. "I kept it. I didn't believe in you because I saw too much of myself. The hunger, the stubbornness. I was afraid you'd lose yourself the way I did." I didn't know what to say. My throat ached. He said, "I was wrong. You built something better. You built people's trust." Tears stung my eyes, but I held them back. "Then why didn't you ever tell me that?" he whispered. "Because I didn't think you needed to hear it. Turns out, I was the one who needed to say it." We sat there for a long time in silence. When I finally left that night, I looked back once. He was staring at the sketch on his lap, smiling. That was the last time I saw him alive. 3 weeks later, he was gone. At the funeral, I stood beside the casket while old colleagues whispered in corners. They didn't know what to say to the woman who'd dethroned their king. After the service, I found myself standing by the gravesite long after everyone else had left. The wind was cold, sharp. "I did what you taught me," I said quietly. "I built. I fought. I survived. But I wish you'd seen me as your legacy, not your rival." The leaves rustled like an answer I'd never get. A month later, I unveiled a new project building, the Doyle Center for Innovation, a hub for young architects and engineers, especially women, to learn, build, and design freely. I named it, not just for him, but for the idea of resilience. At the opening ceremony, I stood at the podium, lights flashing, cameras rolling. I once thought I had to prove myself to someone else, but the truth is, proving yourself isn't about revenge. It's about rewriting the story you were told you couldn't have. The crowd applauded, cameras clicked, and in the back of my mind, I heard his voice again, deep, proud, and distant. "You'll never be me." I smiled to myself. "You're right," I whispered under my breath. I became better.
I thought the courtroom silence that day would be the end of it. But people like Evelyn don't go down quietly. They plot, they wait, and then they strike when you least expect it. 3 weeks later, I got an email from the company's board secretary. Subject line, "Emergency meeting, allegations of misconduct." My stomach dropped. Misconduct? From me? I opened the attached document, 20 pages of anonymous claims accusing me of embezzling company funds and misrepresenting shareholder assets. Each accusation was vague but damaging enough to cause panic. And at the bottom of the file, in small gray letters, it read, "Evidence provided by family representatives of the late founder." Evelyn, of course. When you've been betrayed once, you start recognizing the scent of deceit before it even enters the room. This wasn't just a smear campaign, This was a chess move designed to trigger a board investigation, freeze my accounts, and strip me of control before I could prove my innocence. And the worst part? It was working. By noon, whispers were spreading across Alvarez Tech. People were texting me privately, not to ask if it was true, but to say, "Stay strong, Maria." That's the thing about rumors. They don't need proof to burn everything down. I called my lawyer, Daniel's old friend, Victor Hahn. He was calm, methodical, the kind of man who could deliver bad news with surgical precision. "Maria, they're moving fast. If the board calls for a vote of suspension, you could lose temporary control." "Temporary," I repeated. "And then?" "Then Evelyn and Charles appoint a proxy director. Once that happens, they'll bury you under paperwork until you can't breathe." I exhaled slowly. "So we don't let it get that far." Victor hesitated. "You sound like Daniel right now." "Good," I said, "because this time I'm finishing what he started." The next morning, I walked into Alvarez Tech headquarters like I owned the place, because legally, I did. Employees stared as I passed, half sympathetic, half curious. That's how fear works in corporate air: quiet, contagious. In the boardroom, Evelyn sat at the far end of the table. She wasn't supposed to be there, she wasn't a shareholder, but she'd found a way in through Charles's proxy seat. Of course she had. The chairman cleared his throat. "Mrs. Alvarez, there are allegations of financial impropriety under your management. We've been asked to review internal accounts." I cut him off. "Before we begin, may I ask who submitted the allegations?" A pause, then a voice from the corner. "Charles. It doesn't matter who. What matters is the truth." I smiled. "Oh, it matters, because intent is truth." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a small black folder. Inside was a signed document, one Evelyn carelessly emailed to the company accountant last week. "This," I said, sliding it across the table, "is a letter requesting access to corporate expense logs, signed by Evelyn Alvarez, a non-shareholder. Which means, by law, she obtained company data illegally." The room went silent. Evelyn's face flushed white. "You can't prove that was me," she snapped. "Actually, I can." I clicked the remote. The projector lit up, displaying an email trail complete with her digital signature and timestamp. "I have the metadata. Daniel taught me how to keep receipts." The chairman adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Alvarez, this is serious. These documents could constitute data theft." Evelyn stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. She's framing me." I replied softly, "No, I'm just showing the truth. Like Daniel asked me to." That was the moment everything shifted. The board voted unanimously to drop the allegations, but I wasn't done. "One more thing," I said, turning to Evelyn. "You've been using Daniel's name to reach our investors, claiming you have rights to his shares. I'll be filing a restraining order for impersonation and fraud." She froze, eyes wide, mouth trembling. I could see it, the realization that her game was over. "You can't do this to me," she whispered. "I'm not doing anything to you," I said. "You did this to yourself." That night, I received a text from an unknown number. It read, "He didn't tell you everything. Check his office. .e." At first I thought it was another manipulation attempt, but something about the wording felt different. So, the next morning before dawn, I drove to Daniel's old office, the one he'd used in the early startup days before Alvarez Tech became a skyscraper name. The building was nearly empty, dust settled on his desk like a thin layer of memory. And then I saw it, a small flash drive taped beneath the drawer, labeled only with a single word: truth. I hesitated before plugging it into my laptop. The screen flickered and a video file appeared. "Play me." Daniel's face filled the screen, tired, but clear. He looked straight into the camera, just like he had in the lawyer's office weeks earlier. "If you're watching this, Maria, then you've already seen them try to destroy what we built, but there's one thing they don't know." He paused, breathing shallowly like each word cost him. "There's another account, a holding fund, $4.3 million set aside for you.
I never listed it in the main will because I knew they'd come after it. It's in your maiden name under the same LLC you founded before Alvarez Tech. Use it to rebuild if they burn everything down. Promise me you'll keep creating." He smiled faintly. "You never needed my money, Maria. You built it." The video ended, and for the first time in weeks, I cried. That night, I sat alone in the office watching the city lights flicker against the glass. Evelyn thought she'd won by forcing me into defense, but she'd just handed me the final piece Daniel had left behind. The next morning, I sent a single email to the board. Subject: New Strategic Initiative, Project Phoenix. Attached was the business plan Daniel and I had written together years ago, one that Evelyn never even knew existed. It wasn't just about tech anymore. It was about resilience.
When I got the call from the bank, I thought it was a prank. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, but the words, they made my heart skip. "Ms. Rivera, we're liquidating assets from Rivera Construction Group due to loan default. Are you interested in purchasing?" For a second, I couldn't breathe. Rivera Construction Group, my father's company, the one he said I'd never be smart enough to run? I almost laughed, but it came out shaky. "Can you send me the details?" Within an hour, I was sitting in my office staring at the file. Numbers, debts, collapsed contracts, failed bids. They were auctioning off everything: equipment, vehicles, the office building, and yes, his shares. I scrolled through the report, my mind racing. He'd leveraged his shares as collateral years ago for a massive expansion, the one that failed. Now, the bank owned them, and anyone could buy them. Anyone. Like me. For 2 years, I had been building quietly. My company, Nova Built, had grown from a 2-person consulting operation into a full construction firm with over 140 employees. We had contracts lined up for the next 18 months, profit margins in double digits. And the best part? Many of our clients used to be my father's. It wasn't revenge I wanted. Not really. I just wanted to build something that was mine. Something that proved his words wrong. But that night, as I sat alone in my office, staring at those numbers, I realized this wasn't just about business anymore. This was about taking back what he stole from me, my dignity, my voice, my worth. I called my CFO, Malik. "How much liquidity do we have if we move everything around?" He hesitated. "You're thinking of the Rivera assets, aren't you?" "Yes." He sighed. "We can do it. Barely. But are you sure you want to? That's personal, Alina." "I'm past personal," I said. "This is business. He taught me that." The auction was quiet, almost clinical. No shouting, no chaos, just clicks and bids on a private online platform. When the lot for Rivera Construction's assets came up, my pulse raced. Starting bid, $11.8 million. I waited, let others jump first. 2, 3 bidders pushed the price up. Then, silence. I entered mine, $14.3 million. The number stung. It was nearly half of our available cash, but I knew what it meant. It wasn't just an investment, it was a statement. 10 seconds later, the screen flashed, "Congratulations, you've won." Just like that, it was done. Rivera Construction, my father's pride and legacy, now belonged to me. The next morning, I drove to the old office. It was strange being there again. The cracked parking lot, the fading company logo, the same dent in the front steps where I tripped as a kid. Inside, the place smelled like dust and memories. His old assistant looked up startled. "Ms. Rivera, oh my God, it's been years." "Hi, Elaine," I said softly. "Is he in?" She nodded slowly. He still comes in, every morning, but..." Before she could finish, his voice cut through the hallway. "Elaine, get me the numbers for the..." He froze when he saw me.
For a moment, neither of us said a word. He looked older, thinner. His hair had gone mostly gray, but his eyes, those cold, assessing eyes, hadn't changed. "What are you doing here?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "I came to check on my new property." He frowned. "What?" I set the file down on his desk, the purchase agreement signed and stamped. "I bought Rivera Construction from the bank." He blinked. "You what?" "Your debt's caught up with you, Dad. The bank took your shares, your office, your assets. I bought them." For a moment, I thought he might laugh, but instead his face hardened. "You think this means something? You think you can run this place?" "I don't need to," I said calmly. "I already do. NovaBuilt has your clients, your contracts, your team. I'm just taking what's left." His hand slammed against the desk. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching me fall?" "No," I said softly. "I'm not enjoying it, but I earned it." He stared at me for a long time, jaw tight. "You were always emotional. That's why you'll never last." I leaned in slightly, voice steady. "You said I wasn't smart enough to run a company. I just bought yours." For the first time in my life, he had no words. That night, I sat in the office that used to be his. The walls were lined with faded blueprints and old awards, a reminder of what he once built. I took out my laptop and started typing a message to my staff. "Effective immediately, Rivera Construction Group and NovaBuilt are merging under the NovaBuilt brand. Together, we're building the future." When I hit send, I felt lighter. Not triumphant, not vindicated, just free. My father taught me everything about structures, but he never taught me how to build myself. So I learned. And now, standing at the top of what he once owned, I finally realized I wasn't rebuilding his empire, I was building mine.
The boardroom had always felt cold, too much marble, too much ego. When I was younger, I'd wait outside this very room with a cup of coffee for my father, praying he'd acknowledge me as more than just his daughter. Now, I was the one sitting at the head of the table, and across from me sat the same executives who once nodded along to every word he said, the same men who used to smile politely at me during company events, then dismiss my suggestions as cute. Today, the smiles were gone. "Let's get one thing straight," I began. "This isn't a takeover out of vengeance. It's a merger, a rebirth." Some of them exchanged wary glances. Others stared at their phones, pretending not to care. But one, Harold, the CFO, leaned forward. "With respect, Miss Rivera, this company's been led by your father for decades. The Rivera name belongs to me now," I interrupted, "and NovaBuilt's name means survival. Let's stop pretending this company was thriving." A murmur went around the table. My father sat at the end, silent, his jaw tight. I turned to the screen behind me, pressing a button. The numbers flickered to life. Charts, projections, cash flow analysis. "These," I said, pointing to the red line plunging down the graph, "are Rivera Construction's last 5 quarters, losses in the tens of millions. And this," I switched slides, "is NovaBuilt's trajectory. Revenue doubled, overhead down by 30%, client satisfaction at 96%. I let the silence stretch. We can keep pretending the old ways still work, or we can adapt. Harold cleared his throat. "You expect us to believe you can handle both?" "I already am," I said. "The merger documents are signed. The new leadership plan goes into effect tomorrow." Finally, my father spoke. His voice was low, steady. "You think these people will follow you? You're a child playing at business." The words still stung, even after all this time, but I met his gaze evenly. "I was a child when I believed that. Now I'm the one signing your paychecks." A few people shifted uncomfortably. One board member, Miss Patel, broke the tension. "I've seen your work with NovaBuilt. Efficient, transparent, fair. If you can bring that here, I'll back you." Then another hand went up, and another. One by one, the board voted. When the last voice said I turned to my father. "The motion passes," I said quietly. Effective immediately, I'm assuming full executive control. He didn't move, didn't even blink. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't arrogance. It was disbelief. After the meeting, I lingered behind as everyone left. The silence felt heavier than ever. My father stood by the window, staring out at the skyline, the same skyline our company helped shape. "When did you start hating me?" he asked suddenly. "I don't hate you. I just stopped waiting for you to believe in me." He turned, his expression unreadable. "You could have come to me, worked with me." "I tried," I said, my voice breaking for the first time. "For years I tried, but you only saw what you wanted to, a daughter who'd never be good enough." He looked away. "I built this company with my bare hands, and I built mine from the pieces you threw away." We stood there, years of resentment between us, like an invisible wall. Then I took a breath. "Dad, I'm not here to humiliate you. You can stay on as a consultant or retire with dignity. But the company, our company, needs new leadership." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then finally, he nodded. Just once. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. That night, I walked through the empty halls. Workers were boxing up files, moving old furniture. A faded photo on the wall caught my eye. My father standing beside me at a groundbreaking ceremony, smiling for the cameras. The caption read, "Rivera Construction, Building the Future." I traced my fingers over the glass. "Guess we finally did, huh?" I whispered. The next morning, the rebranded logo went up, Nova Rivera Group. New colors, new motto, same foundation, but stronger. A week later, I held a company-wide meeting. Hundreds of employees filled the auditorium. I looked out at them, men and women who'd lost faith, who'd seen failure up close. And I told them the truth. I know what it feels like to be underestimated, to be told you don't belong. But the truth is, we build, not because it's easy, but because it's who we are. Applause rippled through the crowd. In that moment, I didn't feel like the daughter who'd been cast aside. I felt like the leader I'd always wanted to become. That evening, my father showed up at my office door. He looked smaller somehow, his posture softer. "He stopped by the bank today," he said quietly. "They told me you used your own assets, didn't borrow, didn't call in favors, paid cash." "I did." He nodded slowly. "You really did it all on your own." "Yes," I said, "but I learned from you, the good and the bad." He gave a faint, sad smile. "You remind me of your mother when she used to argue with me." I smiled back. "That's probably the best compliment you've ever given me." We stood there, an uneasy peace between us. Then he turned to leave, pausing at the door. "You built something real, Alina. Don't let it make you hard." When he walked away, I exhaled slowly. Maybe it wasn't forgiveness, but it was something close. Later that night, I stood on the rooftop of the new headquarters, the city lights stretching endlessly below. Every success, every scar, every sleepless night, it all led here. I whispered into the wind, "You said I wasn't smart enough to run a company. You were right." I smiled myself. I didn't run one, I built one.
The first morning as official CEO, I arrived early, before sunrise. The city was still half asleep, a faint hum beneath the clouds. Inside the glass tower that now bore my name, I walked through quiet corridors, the sound of my heels echoing against the marble floors. Every detail, every polished surface, every late-night draft of the contract that got me here, it all felt unreal. There was no applause, no brand celebration, just peace. And for once, that was enough. I made myself coffee from the break room machine, the same one I used years ago when I was just the boss's daughter sitting outside meetings, waiting to be seen. Now, I didn't need permission to walk into any room. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about him, my father. The last time I saw him, he'd stood in that doorway, shoulders heavy, saying, "Don't let it make you hard." And as much as I wanted to pretend his words didn't matter anymore, they did. Because beneath the success, beneath the revenge and poetic justice, I was still his daughter. Around mid-morning, my assistant buzzed in. "Miss Rivera, your father's here." My heart stopped for a second. "Send him in." He looked older than I remembered, not by years, but by weight, the kind you can't measure in time. "I won't take much of your morning," he said. "I just wanted to see the place." I gestured to the open glass windows. Still the same foundation, we just built higher. He walked slowly across the office, his eyes scanning the walls. On one, there was a framed photo of our old construction site, his first big project. I'd hung it there intentionally. He smiled faintly. "You kept it." "Of course," I said. "It's history. It's where we started." He turned to me, his voice quieter now. "I thought I was protecting you when I kept you out, thought business would chew you up. It did, but it also made me who I am." He nodded slowly, looking down at his hands. "You know, when I lost everything, the company, the money, I realized I'd built walls, not bridges. You rebuilt both." The silence stretched between us, fragile and heavy. Then he reached into his pocket and handed me something small, an old brass key. "This was to my first office," he said. "I always meant to give it to you when you were ready." I looked at it, worn, warm, imperfect. Like him. Like us. And for a brief moment, all the anger, all the bitterness, it softened. "Thank you," I whispered. After he left, I sat at my desk and turned the key over in my hands. It wasn't just metal, it was everything I'd fought for: recognition, respect, freedom. And in that moment, I made a decision. 2 weeks later, I called a press conference. Reporters filled the lobby, cameras flashing. The new Nova Rivera Group logo gleamed behind me. I took the podium. This company was born from failure, from broken trust, from rebuilding what was lost. But it stands today because people believed in something greater: fairness, loyalty, integrity. I looked down at my notes, then pushed them aside. And because no one gets anywhere alone, I'd like to announce a new initiative, the Rivera Scholarship Fund. A murmur swept through the crowd. It will provide full education funding for underprivileged students in engineering and architecture, especially women who've been told they're not smart enough. I smiled, remembering every time I'd heard those words. "This is how we build now, together," I said. The applause that followed was thunderous. And somewhere in the back, I saw him, my father, clapping. For once, not as my critic, but as my equal. Later that night, I went to visit my mother's grave. She'd passed when I was just starting my first business, but she was always the quiet strength in my life, the one who believed in me, even when no one else did. I placed a single white lily on the marble and sat for a while. "You'd laugh if you saw us now," I said softly. "You'd say we both needed a good shake." The wind carried through the trees, rustling the grass around me. "I think I finally understand," I continued. "It was never about proving him wrong. It was about proving myself right." Weeks turned into months. Under my leadership, Nova Rivera Group thrived, expanding into new cities, restoring struggling firms, building not just structures, but second chances. I made it a rule. No one gets dismissed for ambition. Every voice matters. Because I remembered what it felt like to be the voice no one heard. And sometimes, when I'd walk past the office wall, I'd catch my reflection in the glass beside my father's old photo. 2 generations, side by side. He visited now and then, mostly to give unsolicited advice about contracts and suppliers. And every time, he'd end our talks with the same words: "You're doing good work, kid." The first time he said it, I almost cried. One evening, months later, I found myself driving through the city outskirts, where the first Rivera construction project still stood. The old housing complex had aged, but the walls were strong, the kind that strong came from good foundations.
I parked and walked around, touching the concrete as if it were an old friend. An elderly tenant passing by stopped me. "You work for Rivera?" she asked. I smiled. "Something like that." She nodded approvingly. "Your father built this place, still standing, all these years later." "He did." Then I added quietly, "And now we build what's next." That night, back in my office, I wrote a letter I never planned to send. "Dad, I used to think success would feel like revenge, like finally proving you wrong, but it doesn't. It feels like peace. I know you did what you thought was best. Maybe we both needed to fall before we learned how to build right. I'm proud of what we created, and I hope, someday, you'll be proud of me too. CA." I sealed it in an envelope and tucked it into the drawer with that brass key. The next morning, I stood before the team, new hires, old veterans, dreamers, builders, and for the first time in my life, I said it out loud without hesitation. "I'm Clara Rivera, CEO of Nova Rivera Group, and this," I smiled, "this is just the beginning." Applause filled the room. Not because of my name, not because of my title, but because they believed in what we stood for. And as the lights hit the golden edge of the new logo behind me, I thought back to the very words that started it all. "You're not smart enough to run a company." I laughed quietly to myself. Maybe not, but I was smart enough to rebuild one.